Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. We live in an age when people assume that knowledge should be available equally to all. In matters susceptible of judgment by normal common sense, however, everyone knows there are exceptions. Access to a control room for intercontinental missiles is limited by universal consent to a very few. Access to the controls of a passenger airliner is limited to those with the necessary knowledge for operating them, and also to those with the proper authorization. If people don't see the disadvantages of making more subtle knowledge universally available, it is only because they are ignorant of the risk involved. In the case of subtle knowledge, the main disadvantage in making it universally available is the harm it might do to one who isn't ready for it, and who might even mock it. True, by mocking truth, he might undermine the faith of a few truth seekers. But then such tests can also be beneficial as a means of strengthening faith. Again, true, the clever doubter's misinterpretation of these truths may dissuade a few seekers from following the spiritual path. But if a seeker really is sincere, he will recognize the truth eventually because it resonates with his own being. No, the greatest problem accrues to the shallow doubter himself. To give him an opportunity to affirm his ignorance might only estrange him even more from the truth, delaying the time when he will turn, as all people must, eventually to the light. Thus, the scriptures advise not secrecy, but discretion in sharing the truth. Jesus Christ says in the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 7, "Give not that which is holy unto dogs, neither cast ye your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet, and turn again and rend you." And Sri Krishna says in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, "Never speak of these truths to one who is without self-control or devotion, who renders no service, who does not care to hear or to speak ill of me." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Yogananda's book of poems and prayers. This prayer is called, "O Divine Sculptor, Chisel Thou My Life. Every sound that I make, let it have the vibration of Thy voice. Every thought that I think, let it be saturated with the consciousness of Thy presence. Let every feeling that I have glow with Thy love. Let every act of my will be impregnated with Thy divine vitality. Let every thought, every expression, every ambition be ornamented by Thee. O Divine Sculptor, chisel Thou my life according to Thy design." Well, this morning's reading is Truth Democratic, includes that well-known Bible quotation, throw not your pearls before swine. And it reminded me of a story from Bharat's early life. He went to college at Chico State, which is a school about an hour and a half from here, and he lived outside of town with 5 other young men at a place that they called Chicken Flats North. And the name suggests a certain vibration, which is accurate. And they had bought some chickens and they had bought some ducks, and they did have a barn, but it was kind of like everything else in the 60s, sort of a loose thing. And the ducks often nested on top of the house, and the chickens, they were always sort of wandering everywhere and laying their eggs in different places. And so sometimes there was an intermingling of eggs. And this one thing that Bharat saw was so dear. He saw a mother hen proudly walking her babies to the watering hole. They just hatched, and she was going to show them how to take a drink. And so she had this little line following her, these tiny little baby chicks, 4 little baby chicks and a tiny baby duck at the end. And so they had like a watering trough like this that was sunken into the ground so that the little babies could drink right out of the trough. And so the mother lined up her little children and was showing them very demurely how to take little sips of water with their beaks. And the little duck at the end just saw the water, and he just went, whew, just started zooming out, paddling and paddling and paddling around the water. He was so happy. And the mother hen was completely alarmed. And she puffed out her feathers, and she was squawking, and she was holding out her feathers in front of her babies so that they wouldn't be tempted to be influenced by this horrible, heretical behavior. And meantime, the little duck had a little duck smile on its face, and it was just churning the water up and down and up and down. And I thought, that is just a really great image for us. Most of us were raised in a traditional Judeo-Christian background, and yet when we came to the teachings of India, things like that God is consciousness, God is bliss, that all truths lead to the same goal, all paths lead to the same goal, these very expansive thoughts, we just were like that little duck. We just paddled right into them. We swam in them. We were so at home in them, and they were very natural to us. And yet, meanwhile, perhaps our mothers or our other relatives were really alarmed and squawking and trying to make sure no one else would be influenced by us. But it's just the truth. We're all at different stages in our journey, and some of us are completely at home with something that seems absolutely dangerous to somebody else. A friend of ours, a new friend actually, she's a woman named Teresa, who came to a weekend that we gave a few weekends ago. And she had been a Catholic in San Francisco, and then she moved to a more rural area. And her church seemed so confining to her that she felt that she should help the church become more open-minded, and she was trying to introduce them to new, broader thinking that she had experienced in her Catholic church, but it was just in San Francisco. And she said after a while she realized that the people in her church actually had the very church that they wanted, and that it was she who needed to look for another church, which I think was really, and I think probably this will be her church, I think it's a really wise insight that God has lovingly fashioned each and every single soul in a unique way. And we have a long journey, which we believe takes more than one life, to find our home in God. And each one will go on a different journey, and we can't do anything but really look at the plate that's in front of us. What has been given to me in this life, and not try to measure it or compare it or look down on the plate that's been served to another. So I think for many of us, this idea of do not cast your pearls before swine, this is something that we've learned, actually. We've probably mostly tried that, shared our enthusiasm for perhaps the autobiography of a yogi or meditation, and we've seen it just fall flat. And we've learned, okay, not everyone wants what I want. And so we've learned to use a little bit of discretion. So for us now, the question is not anything about casting our pearls before swine, but it's how do we avoid being swine? In other words, in the Bible reading, it said that God, in the Bhagavad Gita reading, it said that God will reveal the deepest spiritual truths only to those who have devotion, who have self-control, who love to serve. So we now want God to cast his pearls to us, to give us the deeper teachings and the deeper experiences. And how do we do that? This past week, it seemed like, I don't know if it was majority of the people I talked to sort of uncharacteristically started sharing with me tests in their life. They could be physical tests, mental tests, spiritual tests. But after a while I started to notice this, and I was thinking about Swami Kriyananda, who, as we know, is going through some very heavy physical tests right now, and this is something that often happens to him when he's getting ready to expand Ananda in a new direction, as he is now. And so it occurred to me, maybe we're helping in this process, which would be a happy thought, to just take the next step up in our spiritual development. So in talking about this idea of how do we move in the direction of more devotion and more self-control and so on, I thought, why don't we talk about that in terms of when we're not feeling so great, when we're not feeling so great physically or mentally or so in tune, perhaps we're feeling just a little out, and it's not that easy to be inspired and it's not that easy to be uplifted. Well, how do we deal with those things? And it occurred to me that there could be 3 important ingredients in this. And the first ingredient is not to take ourselves personally. This is one of the happiest teachings that I've learned at Ananda. I won't say I've learned it, that I've heard and that I'm striving to learn at Ananda. And in the Path, it was one of the New Path, is one of the first places that I read something that Yogananda said about this that just delights me so much. Man's greatest trouble is egoism, the consciousness of individuality. He takes everything that happens to him as affecting him personally. Isn't that delightful? Why be affected? You are not this body, you are he. Everything is spirit. So trying to live this idea of what happens is not happening to me personally, it's a great challenge. Yogananda said something quite alarming, really. On the one hand inspiring, on the one hand alarming. He said that, the inspiring part is he said that the thought that we leave this body is what will influence our next life. But the alarming part is he said that, say a person in one life had lost a limb. If that person dies with the consciousness of having only one leg, he will be born again with one leg. Well, that doesn't sound very fair, does it? I mean, it's bad enough to have lost one leg once. Are you being punished by coming back and having it again? And this is why it takes so very long to find God, because the message is that we have to rise above identification with what's happening to us. We have to, at all times, no matter what we've done, what we're facing physically, what we're facing mentally, what we've done karmically, we have to affirm, no matter what, I'm free. I'm full of light, I'm full of God, I'm complete in God, I have everything I need in the divine. And it's a huge challenge, but it's something that we need to get really motivated behind, because it's very, very important. We don't know when the last moment of our life will be. I always sort of thought, oh, this is great. If I can just get that thought right at the last moment of life, okay, I only want God, I'll be set. But it doesn't work that way. We don't have that kind of control. And so we really need to make it a moment by moment practice. What am I holding on to? What am I identifying with? Is it God's joy within me? Is it the light of my own being? Is it love? Or is it something I've done that was a mistake? Or is it some illness that I have? How can I shift my identification and to make it a day by day, moment by moment effort that we all have to do? It's not that any of us is any worse than the other. It's just we have to get into the habit. When we see negativity, we have to shift it. We have to shift to positivity as a practical thing. And we have to just keep moving forward no matter what happens to us. In the newest book of Yogananda's writing, which is called How to Have Courage, Calmness, and Confidence, he gives a wonderful example. He said, if you see some lights in meditation and feel a touch of superconscious joy, you shouldn't be over-elated about that. And if you feel outbursts of subconscious restlessness, I really liked him saying that, if you feel outbursts of subconscious restlessness, you shouldn't be upset about that. Instead, you should be like a tractor. You view the ups and downs of life and you keep steadily moving forward no matter what comes your way, down or up. I just have to still keep my efforts going at devotion, at meditation, at moving toward the divine. The second quality that can help us deal with challenges is tuning in to the power of the Guru within us. Last week, Parvati talked beautifully about the Guru-disciple relationship, and I want to build on what she said a little bit. At one amazing talk, Swami said, you have to all remember the Guru is you. It's not outside of you. It's not far away. The Guru is the highest octave of your own consciousness, the presence of God within us at all times. The question is just, are we going to open to that consciousness or are we going to shut it out? So the Guru is with us, and the Guru within us knows where our obstacles are. We think we know. We have, I think these are my faults. We have no idea what our karma is. But that divine within us knows exactly what we need and is trying to move us forward. And sometimes the way out of those obstacles, unfortunately, means we have to go through those obstacles. Swami told a story about a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya who ended up needing to wait 8 years before he was given Kriya initiation. In those days, people often came to Lahiri Mahashaya and got Kriya initiation immediately, perhaps after a short time of meditation, but certainly not 8 years. And this disciple was waiting 8 years. And then he received the Kriya initiation, and then in his first practice of the technique, he went into cosmic consciousness. Now, the helpful thing about that story was something that Swami said after it. He said, why did this disciple have to wait 8 years for that initiation? He said, perhaps in a past life, he had felt himself to be unfairly treated. Isn't that interesting? So he felt himself to be unfairly treated. So in this life, instead of saying, okay, well, in this life, I've earned the right to be fairly treated, first he had to release his identification, his wrong thinking about ever having been unfairly treated. And how could he do that? By being unfairly treated again and rising above it. Isn't that an amazing thought in terms of looking at your own life and saying, there's what I've done, there's what's happened to me, and then there's my response to what I've done and what's happened to me. And of the two things, the most important thing is my response. Many years ago, I became resentful at the way a friend was treating me. And so, as we generally do here, we try to get out of negative emotions by praying for that person, holding them in the light, lifting it, to get out of the stuck energy. Well, I was doing that and nothing was happening. And then, but actually something was happening because I had an insight pop into my head, and I'm sure that's a result of trying to lift my consciousness. And what the insight that came was the thought, have you ever had this particular feeling of resentment before in your life? And I had to admit, well, yes, I have. This is not an unfamiliar feeling. Of this particular feeling was not unfamiliar to me at the time. And then the thought came, aha, this has nothing to do with that person, that other person. This is yours quality to work out. See, so it's just what was going on with that disciple. It wasn't about Lahiri Mahashaya keeping him waiting 8 years. It wasn't about this person treating me in some funny way. It was mine to work out. And as soon as I had that realization, oh, this is mine to work out, the whole thing vanished. So it's a very powerful way to look at the obstacles that face us, is I've drawn this to myself by some response. And what is that response? And how can I turn that over to God? How can I liberate myself of that? In the Gita, Arjuna, probably one of the most important parts of the Gita is when Arjuna asks Krishna to drive his chariot between the two armies. And he looks at what he must face, which is all a metaphor for what's going on inside his own mind. He has his good qualities, and he has his materialistic desires and his negative qualities, and he has to face them. And Arjuna comes to the point of saying, I can't do this. And Yogananda tells us that this happens in the life of the devotee, life after life after life. We come to a place in our life and we look at where we are. And we say, you know, I was expecting to make a lot more spiritual progress than this by this time in my life. I don't know if I can fight what's ahead of me to fight. I don't know if I have it in me. And some disciples at that point, or some students at that point say, I'm just going to go back and earn some money. Why am I doing this? I'm not making progress. And it happens again and again. But Master said, when the disciple can come to that place inside of himself and say, you know what? It doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm going to proceed on no matter what. Whether I make success, whether I'm at the back of the line like the little duck, I'm at the back of the line of all the disciples moving toward liberation, I'm going to be in that line. I'm not going to leave it, and I'm going to keep moving. And he said, when the disciple can do that, he feels the Lord's smile in his heart. And in that smile, that inner sense of just a little touch of joy inside, he said, in that smile, we know that God is with us and that he will lead us through what we have to go through. The third of these things that can help us, the third quality or attitude we can work on in times of difficulty and not in times of difficulty, is to constantly focus on God's love. God's love for us, God's love for everyone. Just a couple of weeks ago, I read a quotation from the Rig Veda, and it's been making my day for many days. The quotation was this: I cannot open my eyes without the love of God. Every single breath we take is because of the love of God. And the more that we can tune into that, even the slightest thing that we do, Bharat was talking about the Om technique, the Om vibration as we went into meditation. The Om vibration is God's consciousness vibrating to make all of creation. That God's consciousness in vibration is the fabric of creation. It unifies everything. All of us in this room, we're just vibrations of that creation. There's no separation. And Yogananda called the Om vibration the melody of love. Isn't that beautiful? The melody of love. Om is not a vibration like an oscilloscope, just like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's God's consciousness, which is love, vibrating into all of his creation. I want to close by sharing with a beautiful story that so expresses this. It was, I read it in the Ananda blog, and it was written by Jaya. It was an interview with Aditya, who is a young man. He's a doctor, who is a medical doctor, who is part of our community in Pune. He's a monk there. And Jaya was asking him about how he got his beginning in medicine and also on the spiritual path. And he was getting his training as a doctor, and then he found these teachings, Ananda's teachings, or books by Swami Kriyananda and so forth in India. And he was trying to see if he should come to Ananda or become a doctor. He didn't hear back. Excuse me. He didn't hear back from, Ananda. And so he thought, well, I'll proceed on with my medical training. And then he said a miracle happened, and I felt like, okay, I really need to be a doctor. An opening happened. He needed to finish his residency at a hospital. And by a fluke, an opening happened at this hospital. And he was supposed to interview for that at 9 o'clock one morning. And so he was on his way. He was in the Delhi metro on his way to that interview. And a beggar stopped him. And he had 10 minutes, but he thought, well, I can give this beggar 2 minutes. I'll stop. He's a very compassionate human being, Aditya. And he stopped, and the beggar, he said, what do you need? And the beggar said, can you tell me how to find the President of India? And Aditya said, well, that's a really unusual request. Why do you want the President of India? And this beggar pulled from his pocket a photograph of him standing with the President of India, Mr. Kalam. And he had met Mr. Kalam in Lucknow, and Mr. Kalam had said to him, if ever you need anything, come and see me. So Aditya said, well, what do you need? And this man said, well, I've been very ill, and I've had to spend all the money I have on hospitals. I have no money. I haven't eaten in 2 days. My family hasn't eaten in 2 days. I want to ask Mr. Kalam for 2,500 rupees, which is about $50. He wanted to ask the President of India for $50. Well, Aditya thought, there's no way in the world that this beggar is going to be able to find the President of India. He'll never get past the guards, but I'm educated. Perhaps I can talk my way in to see the President. But of course he had this appointment. The night before, he had read a passage in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says to Arjuna, he said, those who think that they can plan things and that they can manage things, I watch. But when I see a devotee that turns his life completely over to me, I take complete charge of that life. And Aditya said, when I read that, I said, that is what I want. I want God to completely take charge of my life. And so there he was, standing in the metro, and he began to pray. And he said to God, it is you who has put this beggar in my path. I want to help him. I think you want me to be a doctor, so I'm going to leave it in your hands about this interview, because I feel I should help this beggar. So he and the beggar go, and they go through various things. It was quite a long day. They go to the president. There's all kinds of hang-ups, and in the end, he was not able to get the beggar in to see president. And then he tried taking him to some of the non-governmental organizations that help people. He wasn't able to get that happening. It was a day when, a holiday when a lot of things were closed, and just kept running into obstacle after obstacle. And finally, when he didn't know what else to do, he said, well, here, I have $32 in my pocket. You can have that. And so he said goodbye to the beggar at that point. At this point, it was 3:30 in the afternoon. So he was somewhat late for his 9 a.m. appointment, but he thought, well, I think I'll go to the hospital and see what's happening. So he goes to the hospital, he asks for Dr. Kanduri, who he's supposed to have met, and the nurse says, wait in the hall. So he's sitting in the hall, and Dr. Kanduri comes down the hallway. And Aditya stands up. He's expecting a scolding. And he says, hello, sir, I'm Aditya. And the doctor, oh, sorry about that. oops. Let's try that again. I won't use my hands so vigorously. And the doctor says, "Oh my gosh, I was supposed to meet you here and you've been waiting all this time." Aditya said, "I didn't want to go into the whole story," so I said, "That's fine, sir." The doctor had never made it to the hospital that day. And he said, "You know, you're the only one who wants this position." And he called and he said, "There's a man here, he can have the post." And so Aditya said, "I felt that my medical career was really a gift from God." So it's such a beautiful and inspiring example of practicing and trying to live by this idea that we know that God knows who we are, He knows what we need, He will take us to the freedom that we are seeking if we put ourselves in His hands.
I've heard your flute high on a cloud, your call I can't resist. Oh, let me come and play with you. We'll scatter music with the dew and sound the morning mist. I've heard you piping on a hill, all else I've set aside. Oh, let us dance the mountain peaks, we'll skip with breezes on the creeks, and soar the valleys wide. Your flute has called me to the fields. Now I've no place to live. Don't send me back, rejected friend. Whatever I call mine must end. All that I am, I give. I hear your call in every tree, in every flower and stream, and sweetest melody of all, a song that heaven's joy recalls. Here in my heart you see.